It is nice to have this rain, right? The bad news is that I have to now mow my yard. Went a while without it, and I don't like mowing the yard. Some people do, but it's great to have the lower temperatures too. I don't like the humidity, but I do like the lower temperatures. So, this Sunday we are starting a new sermon series. It's called "Take a Vow." So, in this sermon series, if you can kind of see by this picture and by the words, it's a little more directed to marriage, but hang in there because it's not all about that, because God's Word goes past all of those things, right? So, yes, we're going to talk about marriage and what that looks like, but we're going to talk also about what Scripture says of our purpose. That purpose is to love God and love others, so therefore our purpose is relational, relationship with God and a relationship with others, people. So that's what we're going to kind of focus too on, is not just marriage, but the fact that we have to have relationships with one another and a life as friendships too. So we have a brotherly type love. And along with that brotherly love we have with one another, we also have to have unconditional love. That's agape love. But some of us in marriage also have what's more of a romantic, intimate type love, right? But it still has to have that agape love, which is unconditional love. So that unconditional love encompasses all of those things of our relationships. So a quick question here is, well, raise your hand if you are married. Okay, now leave your hand up if you know you're an expert at marriage. Oh, we got one. All right, Dave. So since David, we're trading places. I'm going to come. So I don't know if anybody's an expert. I know I do not claim to be an expert at marriage, but the Bible does give us a lot of direction of what we should do in that marriage and what we're going to look at and starting today in that. But I want you to think about this. So first off, if you are married, I want you to think back when you were a kid, teen, young adult, or whatever, what you projected marriage would be like. The picture of what marriage would be like. Not only that, maybe the thought and the idea of marriage, but what that spouse would be like, right? Think about that. Hang on to it just for a moment. Now, if you're not married, think about what you think now. If you want to get married in the future, you're in here, and what is that projection, that picture of marriage, what does it look like? Or that spouse that you hope to meet one day, what does it look like? Now, married people, does it always look like that? No. So we develop these projections and expectations when we're younger sometimes of what marriage should look like. Sometimes our mind, because we're young, whether we're a kid, teen or whatever, teenager, we kind of go fantastical as a word. You know, we see things like Disney movies and Hallmark Channel type stuff, and we think this is how it's all supposed to play out, right? So when we build up these expectations, and then we get married, and what happens? We're a little let down. Marriage is great. I love married life, but it is not just living out just a fairy tale, right? There's moments that are really nice and like those fairy tale type moments in life that we can get to have in marriage, but not every day. It's not perfect in that sense. It's not all about holding hands and walking and going on dates and picking out pillows and bedspreads. You know, there's some rough days in marriage. There's difficult times in marriage. There's conflict in marriage that happens, and we have to work that out to strengthen those relationships with our spouses. So it is hard. It's so hard. In fact, in America, the divorce rate for this projected this year is 40 to 45%. Now, the good news is that's down from years back of 50 to 55%. But I tried doing some research, so I'm looking up, why did this go down? And I can't find anything, because I'm also kind of thinking, hopefully, in my mind, I'm like, okay, hopefully more people are working on their marriages and not getting divorced. But I also noticed, hey, this went down just the past 2 years. And what happened the past 2 years? COVID. Slowed down court systems, slowed down everything. So I'm like, did it just drop because of the lack of availability for stuff? I don't know. But that is a high rate, no matter what, 40, 45 to 50, whatever. That is tremendous rate. That's in the betting world, I'm not a betting person, but in the betting world, that's a risky bet, right? 50% almost, pretty much, of marriages end in divorce. Now, you may have always heard the joke, 50% of all marriages end in divorce, well, the other 50% end in death. But, and that's, it's funny, but that's how it works, in a sense. Now, if that 50%, if you think about that, it's kind of like this. You got your wedding day, think about it. My wedding day, I'm standing at the end of the aisle waiting for my wife to come down the aisle. And she walks down that aisle and she stands before me. And the pastor's there and he starts talking about marriage and love and all that. And then he gets out and he says, okay, you two ready? And he flips a coin. Oh, looking like divorce for you. I mean, that sounds funny, but that's what we're looking at, a 50% chance here. It's like a flip of a coin in a sense. And here's the deal. Everyone says, well, that's not going to happen to me. It won't happen to me. I can do this. It's not going to happen to me. And I guarantee that's what all the 50% said too. It's not going to happen to me, but it does. And that's why we have to prepare ourselves for what marriage is. So here's the deal too. So did you know that climbing Mount Everest has a higher percentage of success than marriage does? Okay, right, yeah. So like 64 to 68% in these most recent years, it was really bad before, but now they have more technology. 64 to 68% of men and women successfully summit Mount Everest, okay? One of the toughest mountains to climb. I'm never going to do it. I don't want to even. So here's the deal. These people who go and say, I'm going to go climb Mount Everest, do extreme measures of preparation for this event, to climb Mount Everest, so that they can be one of that successful percentages, right? So if marriage is 50%, and that just climbing a mountain is just one event. Marriage is a life, a journey. And if it's a 50% rate, would you not want to prepare extremely for that? I know I do want to, and I want to continue to prepare for that, and I wish I would have prepared probably better in my younger days for that. And that's where we're going to go to here, is how are we going to prepare for our marriage? How are we in our marriages already continuing to prepare so that we can grow and strengthen our marriage? So we have to prepare ourselves spiritually for our relationships in general. So what I'm saying here too is if you're married, we have to prepare ourselves spiritually for the relationship we're in with our spouses. And it takes work each and every day. If you're not married and you want to get married, you have to prepare now. Start preparing now for that relationship. If you don't want to be married and you're not, that's okay. If you're not married, no one has to get married, but here's the deal. That's what we're going to look at, is our purpose is to love God and love others. Therefore, you still have to prepare of how you're going to relationally interact with people in this world, and that's what we're going to look at. So this 4 vows, take a vow, this is what it looks like. The first one, the vow of priority, and that's what we're going to look at today. Vow of priority. And then next week, the vow of pursuit. And then the next, the vow of partnership. And the vow of purity. So today, take a vow of priority is what we're going to look at. So my question for you is, what are your priorities in life? Write that down somewhere. And you don't have to answer now. Maybe it's something you think about this week. Maybe you're doing more of the Bible study in the guidebook or whatever. But what are your priorities in life? Now, ultimately, what we're going to look at is He's our priority. But first, I want you to think about, remember back when you thought about what marriage looked like and what your spouse looked like? Or if you're not married, what that spouse you want to marry looks like? What is the priority in our relationships as we do those? If you're already married, what's the priority of what you're expecting out of your spouse? Because sometimes we get those all twisted up. And like I said, we build these expectations thinking we're going to live a Disney movie out or a Hallmark movie type relationship, meeting our prince and our prince, and everything's going to live happily ever after. But what are you looking for in that relationship? What's the priority of that? We're going to get to, yes, our priority is God, but what's the priority of what that person is and who they are? Because ultimately it should be, in those relationships, especially when we're leading into marriage, or if we are married, that they will be a godly man or woman. But sometimes we don't always search for that. I was young before I was married. Sometimes, guys are kind of a little dumb. We're kind of like, man, she's really pretty. She's beautiful, and she'll talk to me. So I think we got a chance here. And that's about as far as we need. We're good right there, and we're like, let's go with this. Women might be a little different. I'm not good at speaking for them, obviously, but they might have a little more needs in the one. They'd be like, okay, yes, he has a job, he has a car, he'll go to H-E-B with me. I think we're good here too. Something, But, and I say that silly, but we sometimes search for these things in our spouses, or if you're looking for a spouse, we search for these things and we put aside the thing that's the most important thing, that we should be seeking someone who is a godly man or woman. And as believers, that should be a priority of those relationships, when it's especially going to go to the level of a romantic type relationship of being possibly marriage. But sometimes we put that to the side and we don't. So I challenge you, if you're in here and looking to get married, if you're young, whatever age, but going to get married, make it a priority that at least that person that you're searching after is a godly man or woman. And if you expect them to be a godly man and woman, right? That means they're going to have to search God. That means their priority has to be God. To be a godly man or woman, they're expecting you to be a godly man or woman. And you have to seek God each and every day. So God is your number one, and your spouse is number two. I'm not a fan of rankings always, but there's an order here. And ultimately God is. He's the priority. No one is before Him or above Him in our lives. He's the most important relationship I have. He's the most important person in my life. And He is number one. So our Lord God is number one in our life. And our spouse is number two. Now, our spouse, we do this together, right? If you're married, you're one. And we do this together and we search Him together, but He has to be number one in our life. Jesus even gave us a greater commandment or purpose, in a sense, that even looks something like this, right? He says, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Then people, relationships. The second one, what is? Love others as yourself. And it has to go in that order too. Because I can't love others without His love. He gave us love, so we know what love is, but there's an ability to love even if I didn't know Him as Lord, but I can't love someone with all of my own love as well as I can knowing His love and understanding what agape love, which He had for us, is, which is unconditional. I can't have mercy and grace well enough for others in relationships without knowing His. That goes for my wife. So I can't love her. I can love my wife so much more and greater because of Jesus Christ in my life, because He's number one, than I could ever on my own. I can have more grace and more mercy and patience and kindness and gentleness and humility for her in that relationship because of Him in my life and making Him my priority than I could ever have trying to do it all on my own. And like I said, this isn't just for married people. This is our purpose in life that He gave us in this commandment. So if you're married, yes, this reflects into that. And it reflects with a romantic type love also because it's your spouse. And if you're going to get married, this is part of your prep. Having Him first, allowing His love to work in you and knowing that gospel that He did for you. He died on the cross, and that mercy and that grace that He gave you so that it can funnel out in the relationships that you are building along the way of maybe working toward marriage. And if you're in this crowd and you're like, I don't want to get married, I don't want to get married again, or whatever that's okay too, because it's still our purpose to love God and love others. Therefore, we have Him in our life as our priority, and we allow that love, that mercy, and that grace, and all those fruit of the Spirit to flow through us into relationships with one another, into friendships, co-workers, neighbors, the body of believers, us, that still translates of how we are relationally working with one another and how God works in us. So, as I said, marriage is hard. It's risky in the sense it's 50% almost pretty much of a rate of divorce. Therefore, we must prepare for something that's going to be hard. So we have to start preparing today what that looks like for God to be number one in our lives. If you're married and you're not making God number one in your life, start today and seek Him. If you're not married and you want to get married, your prep starts now too. Start seeking Him, making Him number one in your life, because that's the vow we're going to take today. The vow today is, I promise God will be my first priority and my spouse will be my second. If you're married, that rings true. If you're not married, I promise God will be my first priority in my life, and my future spouse will be number two. But maybe it's different now. Maybe it's my friends, my family. If you're not ever going to get married and you don't want to get married again or something like that, God is still your priority in life, and others that are in your life will be number two. That's the vow we must make. Now, God created marriage as one of the first institutions established. You can read about it in Genesis in the beginning and creation. He created all things. He said they're good, right? And He created Adam. And what did He say about Adam? He said, this is good. But what did He eventually say? He said, something's not good, right? He said, this isn't good. What did He say isn't good? That Adam was alone. And here to point out, yes, I love being married and we come together as one flesh, and that's what He's going to get to in the point of this in Genesis even. But we are better together no matter what. So even if you don't want to get married, we're better together. That's why He created the church. We are meant to be together in relationships. Some relationships are friendships, brotherly and sisterly love. And some relationships go romantic, intimate type love, along with that agape love, right? And that's what marriage looks like in that. But we're better together. He knew that we were not meant to live life alone. So don't live life alone. You have to have people around you. You have to have a body of believers around you, even more specifically. And you have to, if you're going to get married, have that godly man or woman in your life that you can grow together within. He has called us to be together. So He put Adam to sleep, right? Took a rib out, formed woman. Adam wakes up married. And it's, I mean, it's Garden of Eden now. It's all good. God did it. It's not like today. This isn't Las Vegas, but this is what happened in a sense. And then there's a ceremony right before Him of Adam and Eve coming together as one flesh that He created and ordained and established marriage. And that's why we see Genesis 2:24. It says, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Now here's what's interesting. This is Genesis. This is talking about Adam and Eve here. He's just brought together. Adam didn't have a mother and a father in a sense, right? He was created. Yes, God is his father because He created him. He's our father because we're His creations too. So He's projecting the future establishment of what marriage looks like. That we will leave our mom and dads and become married and meet our spouses, our wife or our husband, and become one flesh. The word leaves is a root word in Hebrew is azab. I don't even know if I'm saying that right because I'm not very good at Hebrew. But it means to loosen or relinquish. So we, at one point, the most important relationship someone in my life was my mom and dad growing up. But then I relinquished that relationship in a sense, and I go on my own, and then I establish another relationship with my wife, and we became one flesh in that time. And He calls us to a relationship, but the most important part of that relationship first is that we have a relationship with God. And that He is the number one in our life, seeking Him so that we can then pour out all the stuff that God has given us, that Jesus Christ did for us even on the cross, into that relationship. So God must be number one before marriage in our lives. And if you're already married, God needs to be number one in our lives, seeking Him today. But here's what happens many times when we get married. I know I've done this and I fall into this sometimes in some aspects, but we make our spouses number one. We make them the actual priority. So then we are asking them to do something and be something that they cannot be. We are designed to make God number one in our lives. He's that priority. And all Him and what He has done satisfies our soul. And yes, I love my wife, but she cannot satisfy my soul like God can. And I can't satisfy hers like God can. but we project that and we make them God in our lives, basically. And we idolize them. And what happens then? If we do that, we go that route where we idolize our spouse and raise them to that kind of level, what's going to happen? They're going to fail. And when they fail, what happens? You demonize them. Which means you make them the bad guy because they did not meet your needs, your requirements, what you said or think they should have been or how they should be, because you projected them to be number one, the best, highest priority, who God is in your life, and they failed. Therefore, you make them the bad guy and you change your view of them. And then that starts to corrode relationships. It starts to affect how you see your spouse. It starts to change the view that you have for them because they're not meeting the need that you tried to put on them. They're not meeting that satisfaction that you want out of it, that relationship. So then you demonize and you make them the bad guy. And it can start as something simple, but I want you to think to the depths of what you do in this relationship. It could be something simple like a newlywed couple, and she says, "Oh, I just love him. He's so laid back and just, it's just so chill and fun just to hang out and just be around him." And then a few years down the road, she's like, "Oh my gosh, he's so lazy and I can't get him to do anything." Or it could be the other way, guys, you're like, oh, you talk about your wife, your newlywed, oh, I love how driven she is. I love how detailed she is. I love that she plans all these things out, and we just have so much fun living out these plans. And then eventually, a few years down the road, you're like, oh my gosh, she's driving me nuts, and I can't live out the things that she wants me to do. Now, those things are just simple. Sometimes they start simple, though, in our relationships, and they build. But here's the point of that. What are you projecting on your spouse to be like? Even a characteristic, abilities, all of those things. What are you projecting on them to look like that meets and satisfies your soul? Because they cannot do that. We can't do that to our spouses, raising them to that level, making them like God in our lives. We can't do that, putting them in that spot because they're going to fail. Instead, we seek to have an agape type love for them, which is unconditional, no matter what, right? And that's hard to do. That can be hard to do with our spouses, let alone in a relational setting with people that are friends. And we're called to make Him the priority for that reason, so that love can flow through us, so that mercy and grace can flow through us. Because what's thing that's just killing relationships is that we have no mercy and grace. In the relationship that we have God, the marriage between us and Him, the amount of mercy and grace that He continues to overflow on me each and every day, and you, is undescribable. And He calls us to have that same type of relationship with our spouses. And in fact, even with people. The only difference is one type of love, which is romantic type love or brotherly type love in there. But we have to have that unconditional love. Sometimes we go down the road and we even make our kids priority. We have kids, they're wonderful, they're blessings. I have one, he's an awesome kid. I love being a dad, but he cannot be the priority. God's the priority. And in fact, I said I'm not a fan too much of rankings, but there's rankings. It's God, my wife, and then my kids. Right? If you even think about it, kids are a temporary assignment. They have to leave, they relinquish and go on, right? We hope so. Yeah, right? We do hope so. But our spouse is there for the rest of the journey of our lives. So now, because there is something system like that, of God is our first in our lives, our spouse, and then our families even, we have to protect. This is the thought today. We have to protect our priorities. So not only do we prepare for what that looks like in spiritual of our relationships, now we have to protect that priority so that we don't start putting our wives as number one priority in our lives, or our children, or our work, or anything else. We have to protect what that looks like. How do we protect that? Is we seek Him each and every day. You have to have a relationship with God, going to Him each and every day in His Word, in prayer, talking to Him. He's a God that desires for you to be with Him, spending time with Him, to get to know Him. And the way we do that is we have to spend time with Him. So we have to read His Word. We have to pray and seek Him each and every day. And sometimes that's easy for us, right? Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's easier. But here's what's even harder. Then, if you are married, not only do you seek Him on your own, but you get your wife together and y'all seek time together with the Lord. Because that priority of Him first still brings you together under Him. And here's why I'm just going to be honest. And I'm going to kind of slightly address men here for a second. It's because we should lead out. Now, this is addressing both, but men, listen. We have to do this with our wives. Now, I've talked to many husbands and done premarital counseling, marriage counseling, and other stuff, and talked about even this specific thing. For some reason, for men, I don't know about women, it is really hard to bring the intimacy of our relationship with Jesus and the intimacy of our relationship with our spouse, our wives, and merge that together. I ain't gonna lie, it is hard for me too. I sometimes think it's almost easier praying with a stranger than my own wife. And that shouldn't be that way. And we have to just get over it. And we have to spend time with them on a spiritual intimacy level too. We have to pray together. And we have to go to God together. And I fail at that sometimes. It's hard. But that's part of our preparation. That's part of us growing a great marriage and that relationship, strengthening it in Him. We have to do those things. And then we serve one another unconditionally, with mercy and with grace. We have to be serving one another. Right? Now, men also, I think it's in us just naturally to want to protect. Right? I'll die for my family. I'll do whatever. If someone breaks in my house, I'm going to go all Chuck Norris on them, right? And I don't know, you don't know who he is, look him up. But I'm going to take them out, whatever it takes. I will die for them, right? And that is important. That's part of the sacrifice, and we can see that. Christ died for us, right? Even. But there's more to that, because that scenario can happen, but most likely is not going to happen. I'm not going to probably have to literally die for my family. But I am called to sacrifice daily, so therefore I must die to something daily. And I die to myself first for Him, and then I also die to myself so that I can serve and love my family better. I give up the things of selfishness and pride and arrogance and fears and all those things, putting those away so that I can serve them and love them better. And so that I can be an example of who Christ is to them, and I can carry them along and show them always back and point back to Him and who He is and what His gospel says, and that He loves them. So that's part of my sacrifice. So part of the sacrifice of our life is not that we have to die for them, but that we have to live for them. And therefore, if we're going to live for them, we have to have the person who gives us life. Therefore, that's why God should be our priority. Number one in our lives. Going to Him each and every day. That's the vow that we take, that He is our priority. Ephesians 5:25 says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loves the church and gave Himself up for her." That's the unconditional love that Jesus showed us. That's agape love. When He gave us mercy and grace. When He went to the cross and He created the new covenant, right? That if we put our faith in Him, that He is Jesus, the Son of God, that He died for our sins, therefore taking those sins to the grave and saying, I'm done with them, there is no more sin, rose from the grave, sits at the right hand of the Father and says, if you believe in me, you will be saved eternity. I give you grace, which is forgiveness. And then He created the church, which He says, this is my people that I love. And we are the people who love God and love others because we want to add more people to His church, bringing them to Him so that they see that He is Lord, that He is God. But we're also called to love our wives as He loved that church. And that's the example that we give sacrificially to Him, that we give of ourselves, that we give everything that we got to Him and then to that relationship so that we can continue to build on that, giving mercy and grace each and every day to our wives, to our husbands. sitting together and talking about life and what God is doing in our lives. Sharing those moments of future and all the things that are going on. Serving together. That's what He calls us to do in those times. And here's one thing we have to get away from. It took me many years in marriage to learn this. Hopefully, I think all y'all already know this. I'm going to project that. But here's the deal. We have to stop scoring our love against one another. And what that means is I can't show or project and show love and do these things and serve my wife expecting I get a trophy for it. Because I don't. And that's not what unconditional love means. And I remember many years of trying to do that, doing these things and serving and loving and giving of my heart, and it not being authentic because I expected that I should have something back because of it. Therefore, we don't score that love. Instead, we just give it freely as Christ gave it to us. So we have to stop making excuses in our relationship. They're too easy. Instead, go to God and give it all to Him and allow His love to work through you, because love makes that way. Love makes a way in that relationship, but we have to have Him as priority. I'm going to ask Samuel to come up here as we close. So I ask you today again, what is the priorities of your life? What are you seeking each and every day? What are your desires? And as you write those down, if they really aren't, be honest too. If they're not God, His kingdom, and how to live out His purpose, which is to love God and love others, then you need to start reordering that priority toward that to Him and who He is and putting Him number one.